All right, we're going to get going on the Parsha class, beginning on page 351 in the red Etz Chaim Chumash. This is Parashat Vayera, and we are well into the Exodus narrative now. And this is God is offering specific instruction to Moses. But I do want to flip us back to page 340, 341, just the last little bit of Parshat Shemot, just as a reminder of where we are, because it can be very easy to get disoriented here. So what has happened previously up till now is that Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh, did the let my people go thing. Pharaoh's response was to make life harder for the Israelites. They now have to build bricks without straw. The people are very mad at Moses. Moses is very distraught, and he's upset that things appear to be going worse. And then at the beginning of chapter 6, which you can see here how we have one verse from chapter 6 at the end of the Parsha, there is a strange way the Parsha gets broken here compared to the chapter breaks. Chapter breaks are not essentially Jewish, for what it's worth. They are sort of imported from Christianity, but they're still pretty useful. It's useful to have a common frame of reference here. But there's always the question of where do you break? Where do you make the chapter break? And here, we're not quite lined up with the way the chapter breaks work, but probably this is the chapter break is maybe a slightly better way to break it here. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'You shall soon see what I will do to Pharaoh. He shall let them go because of a greater might. Indeed, because of a greater might, he shall drive them from his land.'" Now, probably the reason we end with that is to end the Parsha on a happy note. Because otherwise we would be ending the Parsha with "you have still not delivered your people," and that's not so great. So we end the Parsha on a happy note, and now we're going to flip back over to page 351 to continue God's conversation with Moses. It says, "God spoke to Moses and said to him, 'I am the Lord.'" This is very strange when you consider that in the previous verse, God was also speaking to Moses. Why do we need the repetition? Why do we need to be told once again that God is speaking to Moses? Scholars have an answer based on the multiplicity of sources. The sort of traditional answer here is that there's something very profound about to happen here, and we're just sort of reaffirming or recontextualizing it, and it does actually work pretty well in terms of breaking here the Parsha. I'll also note that I'll tell you what, we'll skip that for now. We might circle back to that, but let's take a look at the actual text itself. It says, "God spoke to Moses and said to him, 'I am the Lord,'" or in the Hebrew, "Ani Hashem. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. I have now heard the moaning of the Israelites because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant." All right, let's pause there. So there's a lot going on here. And again, you might ask the question, didn't we have all of these facts established already in the previous Parsha, where God speaks to Moses at the burning bush and says to Moses that he was known as El Shaddai to the patriarchs, but now he's introducing himself as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, as the unpronounced, ineffable name of God, connected to the verb for being. we did all this already. We did all this already. Now we appear to be doing it again. It's also very unclear where we are in this moment. Is Moses in Egypt? Did Moses go back to the desert? Is he at the mountain of God, which was referenced in the last parsha? It's all a little bit unclear. But it seems that what's happening here is that God is once again reiterating the connection to the ancestral stories, to the to the struggles of the patriarchs and matriarchs, and just making sure that Moses is steeled by this. This is a little bit of chizuk. This is a little bit of lifting up and strengthening, because Moses is feeling pretty down right now. Moses is feeling the full weight of Pharaoh's might, and as often happens, the people are upset not at their oppressor, but they are upset at their would-be liberator who is causing trouble, making things worse for all of us. And so God here is seemingly emphasizing God's own role in the family story as a way to remind Moses that this particular chapter of the story isn't over yet, and things are going to be okay. Things are going to work out just fine. Any thoughts about that? Questions, comments, concerns?
No, not at this point.
Sure. So we'll keep going here in verse 5, because verse 5 introduces an interesting philosophical conundrum, where light just turned off. Where God says, "I have now heard the moaning of the Israelites because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant." So you could ask the question, what does this mean? What does it mean to say that God heard the moaning of the Israelites? What does it mean to say that God previously hadn't heard it? Which I think is the implication of saying, "I have now heard it." It is that God didn't hear it previously. What does it mean to say God remembers the covenant? What does it mean, sort of by implication, to say God had previously forgotten about the covenant? I mean, that is how this language would be used if we were talking about a human being. Oh, I remembered a thing. That what that means is it had slipped my mind previously. And probably most of us are going to be fairly uncomfortable using that sort of language around God. That God, it might have slipped God's mind, or maybe God didn't notice for a while, that God was busy elsewhere. God just couldn't be bothered to pay attention. I don't think that's the sort of understanding that most of us have of the nature of God, either in a sort of philosophical sense, where many people want to approach God as all-knowing, all-powerful, and in a relational sense as well, where so much of the Torah heretofore has been about the loving relationship and the loving connection, the covenantal connection that God has with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. The whole purpose, the whole point of a covenant, to borrow from some of the academic scholars who have compared the Torah to other ancient texts from the Middle East, a covenant is an unbreakable contract. A covenant can be violated, but once you return to the terms of it, you're always bound by them, no matter what. And so the question becomes, what would it mean to say that God had not previously remembered the covenant, or hadn't been in a position to care enough about the relationship to want to check in with the people and see how they were doing? And this is a tricky problem that the text introduces here. And we might say, well, this is sort of academic, But if, those of us who are interested in having our own connection to God mediated through the Jewish covenant, we might ask ourselves, well, does this apply to us? Does God know what's going on in our lives? Does God care what's going on in our lives? Are there times when God doesn't remember us? Are there times when God doesn't bother to check in? And is that the purpose of prayer? Is prayer about sort of needling God, being the squeaky wheel? I mean, it certainly seems like you could make that case here, but I think most of us would probably be fairly uncomfortable doing that. I think for most of us, that really flies in the face of our, conception of the God of Israel. And so I'm not coming here with any particular answers to that question, but it is interesting to ponder it. What does prayer life mean? What is the crying out of the Israelites?
It's
oh, please go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. This is, I'm trying to wrap my arms around this, but it's almost like we're doing something that we're not supposed to do, and that means apply a human side, a human face to Hashem. And it's almost because what we're describing is our own relationships with each other, our relationships with our families, which could mean the parents, our children, and that in the case of a children, a parent, the acts of the child when they're not necessarily agreeable, children will act out in a way that maybe is not favorable, and looking for the attention of the parents. So in this particular case, we're looking for the attention of Hashem, and to remind Hashem of Hashem's responsibilities, towards the covenant. And so we do that through prayer, okay? Or we can also easily do it through acting up in, not necessarily, nice ways, and one of them is questioning, Hashem, why do you not pay attention to us? Why are we still suffering? You told us you heard our cry, you sent us Moses, and now we're crying again. So I just find that to be just a very fascinating, just juxtaposition.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I mean, you could very easily say something different here, right? Which is, I told Abraham that the bondage in Egypt was going to last a certain number of years. It has. And so now it's time to move on to the next step. It's almost like when I set my coffee maker to go off in the morning. But that's not what God is saying here. God is at least implying that the cries of the people have stirred him, have awakened God to some sort of action that might not have otherwise happened. Again, the text isn't explicitly clear about this. It's we're sort of reading between the lines here, trying to understand the nature of God from these narrative sections. But it is it's very complicated. I don't think there's a simple answer here.
No. A lot of study, a lot of thought has to go into.
Oh yeah. All right, let's keep going in the text here. Verse 6, say therefore to the Israelite people, I am the Lord. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements. And I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. You shall know that I, the Lord, am your God, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians, and I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. So this is an interesting sort of juxtaposition where we see here, essentially, speaking as God, I am fulfilling the terms of the covenant, the old covenant, the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob covenant, and at the same time establishing something new. which is the way the rabbis read the book of Genesis. It's not quite Jewish. It's not quite 100% in the covenant, because the covenant is what's happening here in the book of Exodus. From the rabbinic perspective, from the Jewish perspective, Exodus is much more important than Genesis. And what's happening here with the liberation from Egypt and the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, that is the covenant sine qua non. And everything with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is sort of a preface, is sort of the prequel or the prehistory, but not nearly as important. And so what God is doing here is sort of bridging that gap by saying, essentially, the term of the new covenant is that I take you out of Egypt and you become my people. And it's sort of, that's the quid pro quo. I rescue you from Egypt, and after that, I am your God in a national sense, in the sense of a peoplehood having a direct connection to a particular God. And that's the sort of thing that couldn't happen previously. It couldn't happen in the book of Genesis because there was no Am Yisrael. There was only B'nai Israel. There was only 70 people going down into Egypt. That's not a nation. That's not an Am. That's just a big family. That's an extended family. And so it's only once you have enough people to constitute a nation that you're able to have this sort of national covenant and this national revelation at Mount Sinai. But we do it through the terms of the previous covenant and not throwing out the previous covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that is based around land, that is based around the land of Canaan, the land of Israel. And so it's all getting wrapped together in this section here.
So Rabbi, I didn't think about this, and I think this is what I heard you say, is it was also almost like an amended covenant. So you had the original covenant, and then all of a sudden Hashem, amends it. So, is that what you said? Because that's a very interesting concept.
Yes, no, I think that's spot on. It's amended in the sense that you add new material to it, but you never take away anything old. You never take away any of the previous aspects of the covenant. I'll give you an example. This is a very relevant example for later on in Jewish history, where we have a covenant that God establishes with David and his family and his sons, his heirs, that there will always be a son of David on the throne in Jerusalem. And this is a covenant that is boundless. This is a covenant that is unconditional. There's nothing in there that is required of David's children. The text says, if you sin, if you turn against me, I will beat you with the rods of men. So if a descendant of David on the throne in Jerusalem sins against God, they'll be punished on earth. They'll be punished by some army coming and defeating them and stealing all their gold or something along those lines. But David's children will never be taken off the throne in Jerusalem. So this is an unconditional covenant that God establishes. And when the southern kingdom is facing adversity, it seems like many of the prophets of the southern kingdom said, don't worry about it because we've got this unconditional covenant. And the only one who comes in with the correct interpretation is Jeremiah. And he says, actually, the unconditional covenant of David is wrapped up inside the conditional covenant of Moses. Mm-hmm. That when we are loyal to God and we occupy the land of Israel, when we live in the land, then there will always be a throne for David. Or when there is a kingdom in Jerusalem, it must always be occupied by a child of David. But that doesn't mean that there will always be a kingdom in Jerusalem. That doesn't mean there will always be people in the land of Israel, because that covenant is very conditional. God says in Deuteronomy and in other places that if you sin, that you're going to get thrown out of the land, which is precisely what happens. So none of it comes to cancel any previous part. But these amended covenants get wrapped up inside one another. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does.
All right, so we've got here. So the message from God ends, and in verse 9 it says, "When Moses told this to the Israelites, they would not listen to Moses. Their spirits crushed by cruel bondage." So this actually comes as a counterpoint to something that happened in the previous parsha, where we have the big burning bush episode, and God speaks to Moses, gives him this charge, tells him what's going to happen. Moses and Aaron go down to Egypt, and they're received by the Zakenim, by the elders. And the elders are very happy to hear this, and they accept Moses as the prophet, as the spiritual leader, as the national leader. And this is, so the first time around, they were like, yeah, Moses, he's got the direct line to God. He's got the message. Let's do this. But now it's gone rather poorly. It's gone, Moses went to Pharaoh. It didn't go well. Pharaoh increased the people's burden, and they cried out against Moses. And now Moses has heard from God again, but they won't listen this time. This time, their spirits have been crushed, and they're not interested, or I think probably more likely they're not capable of listening to Moses. This is a common and sad and cruel fact of human nature, that often the most oppressed people are unable to liberate themselves because the psychology of oppression is absolutely destructive to the human will, to the human impulse to lift ourselves up. So then God speaks again. Verse 10, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites depart from his land." Now we're trying this again. But Moses appealed to the Lord, saying, "The Israelites did not listen to me. How then should Pharaoh heed me, a man of impeded speech?" So the Lord spoke to both Moses and Aaron in regard to the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, instructing them to deliver the Israelites from the land of Egypt. So we've received this second time around. Academic scholars, by the way, think that this is just these are two different versions of the same story that have been sort of laced together. But we'll leave that for another time. Then we have something very strange here, beginning in verse 14. We sort of interrupt the story to give the family tree. Now, we already did this in Exodus 1. We got a breakdown of the people who came to Egypt, the children of Jacob, and now we're getting the more detailed breakdown here.
Hey, Rabbi, before you go on,
please go ahead.
If we could talk about the last line in verse 12, which talks about, Aral Safatayim. So it says, his obstructed lips, right? So,
right.
So is this the first mention of, Moses' speech impediment?
It's not actually. This is one of the things that makes scholars think that that this might be two different versions of the story that have been laced together. In the previous parsha, we also had this reference to his impeded speech. Yeah, let me see.
So you just said something about two parts of the story, so two different stories.
Right. Yeah, because if you go back to page 334 to Exodus 4, 4:10, Moses says to the Lord, "Please, O Lord, I have never been a man of words, either in time past or now that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." And so You can read it in the sort of source critical way where these are two different versions of the same story. I don't think you have to. I think you could say that Moses is telling God, kind of, I told you so. Like, I told you I wasn't very good at speaking, and you made me speak, and it didn't go well. And so now I'm reminding you again. I'm not really the guy that you should be asking this of. I'm not in a position to do this.
Okay.
So yeah, what can you do, right?
Sorry for the digression.
Oh no problem. No problem. So all right. So then we have this family tree, and I won't read all of the names on the list. But it's interesting here to see that we start with Reuben and then Simeon and then Levi. So we're sort of going through the brothers in order, but it seems like our primary interest here is getting to Levi so that we can get to Moses, who is a Levite. Now, why we weren't told most of this before is a sort of interesting question. There aren't, to my satisfaction, there aren't like truly good answers about this. But this sort of connects to the previous parsha where we had the same sort of family tree going on, except if you'll recall, in the previous parsha, when we're told the story of Moses being put into the river, we're simply told a daughter of Levi married a man from the house of Levi, and they had a child. And so it's kept very anonymous. We don't know the father's name, we don't know the mother's name, we don't know the sister's name, and we don't learn Moses's name until the very end of the story when Pharaoh's daughter names him. So now we're going to get the story with the names filled in, and so we see that Levi had a son named Gershon, and Gershon had some sons, and we get here Amram took his. So this is verse 20. Amram took to wife his father's sister Yochebed, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. And the span of Amram's life was 137 years. So I don't know why they do this, but if you look at the Hebrew is not nearly as specific about this as the English translation. In verse 20, Vayikach Amram et Yochebed. So that simply means that Amram married Yochebed, or he took her as a wife. Vayikach Amram et Yochebed dodato lo leisha. So he took Yochebed, Amram took Yochebed, his doda. And you can definitely read that as aunt, as his father's sister. You don't have to read it as aunt, interestingly. There's another perfectly fine translation, which would be dear one or beloved. He took his beloved Yochebed. And there's actually an interesting midrash on that reading here, because from our point of view, living in a culture that doesn't really have arranged marriages, we might imagine that everyone marries their beloved. But actually, in the ancient world, that wasn't really true. There was a presumption. Most societies actually had this presumption that marriage was an arrangement made by families that put two young people together who, if the families did it right, would eventually fall in love with each other. And the love of husband and wife was a very slow burn in the ancient world. It was not romantic love. It was much more bound up in duty, bound up in the role people play in families. And so it would be rare incredibly rare to love your spouse on the day you got married to them. And so what does it mean here to say that Amram took his beloved Yochebed? Well, it might mean that's a mistranslation, that aunt is probably a better word, but there's a particular midrash that says that what's going on here is there in the earlier chapters, if you'll recall, Pharaoh passes this ordinance, this law saying that all of the Israelite boys are to be thrown into the river, and the girls, it doesn't say. It doesn't say. And according to the Midrash, Amram is the head of the tribe of Levi and one of the heads of the Jewish people, and he orders everyone. He says, "This is too cruel. This is too much to bear. Everyone separate husbands and wives. You should not sleep together anymore. You should not get pregnant, and you should not have children, because this is just too much. This is too cruel." And so he divorces his wife. He divorces his wife Yochebed as an example to everyone else, and then she convinces him that he's being a fool, because she comes and says, "What you have done is worse than Pharaoh, because Pharaoh simply wants to deprive us of our boys, but you are depriving us of the boys and the girls both." Mm-hmm. And Amram is convinced by this and moved by this, and he and Yochebed remarry. And so what this verse might be pointing to is not their first marriage, which was in Exodus 1, but this is their second marriage. This is their remarriage after their divorce. Vayikach Amram et Yochebed dodato. And so it's only as a result of their second marriage that she bears Aaron and Moses.
Can I ask a question here?
Please.
I seem to have remembered that there is a midrash that Yochebed was actually a daughter of Levi, the Levi, as opposed to just a Bat Levi.
Yes.
Which would make her a great aunt.
Right. Yes. She's rather old if you do it that way.
Am I right about that? Was it Yochebed?
Yes. So in the text itself, if we go back to is it Exodus 2? Yeah, Exodus 2:1. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. That's not the best translation. In the Hebrew, it's Vayelech ish mi beit Levi vayikach et bat Levi. So you can read bat Levi to mean a woman of the house of Levi, but the rabbis understand bat Levi to mean that Yochebed is Levi's daughter. And in fact, we talked about this, was it last week? She's a very particular special daughter in that she is the 70th person who is born on the way to Egypt. She's born on the border in the sort of liminal space between Canaan and Egypt, as the family of Jacob is coming down to Egypt at Joseph's invitation. And so if that's true, then, and if a bunch of other things are true also, which you can read about in Seder Olam Rabbah, where this second century rabbi does the math and tries to figure out all this stuff. If that's all true, then Yochebed would be 130 years old when Moses is born. Wow. Rashi doesn't like that because he says, well, why wouldn't the Torah mention that then? That's an even bigger miracle than when Sarah gave birth to Isaac, and the Torah is silent on it. So we must have gotten our math wrong somewhere. That's Rashi's approach, but yeah, according to Midrash, she's quite a bit old at this point.
Interesting. Very.
All right, so this light keeps turning off. It's very frustrating. All right, so
Rabbi, that only means enlightenment.
I'm just gonna hang out here. I've got enough, and I think you can see me okay. Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, we can see you.
All right. So we'll just point out here that when verse 23, that Aaron took to wife Elisheva, daughter of Aminadav, the sister of Nachshon, and she bore him Nadav, Avihu, Eleazar, and Itamar. So I only point that out because it is an interesting footnote in all of the family trees that the Kohanim, by definition, the descendants of Aaron, are also the descendants of Elisheva, who is the sister of Nachshon from the tribe of Judah. Now, this is, notable perhaps because of the fame of the tribe of Judah. It's sort of the premier tribe in the ancient Israelite confederation. We probably all heard the story of Nachshon, and he's the first one who jumps into the sea and causes it to split. Nachshon and Aminadav are also descendants of Peretz, the child of Judah and Tamar. So to the extent that the Judah and Tamar story from Genesis 38 might leave us feeling a little icky, she's pretending to be a prostitute, sleeping with her father-in-law, having these sons, and yet they end up becoming the ancestors of the sort of premier line of the tribe of Judah, of Nachshon, and then of David. They also are the ancestors of all of our Kohanim. So all of the priestly families descend from Judah and Tamar through Elisheva, Aaron's wife. All right, let's see. Just one more quick thing here. Verse 25. Aaron's son Eleazar took to wife one of Putiel's daughters, and she bore him Pinchas. So now we've sort of set the table. All of the characters are here. Pinchas is going to be quite important as the wilderness journey unfolds, and we're just sort of laying out the family tree here. And you see it sort of stops. Like maybe there was more interesting stuff going on. Maybe there was more family tree material that didn't make it in here. We started with Reuben and then Simeon, and then we got to Levi, and that appears to be the important one. And then we're done. So it says, "This is the same Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, 'Bring forth the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop.' It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to free the Israelites from the Egyptians." These are the same Moses and Aaron. So just making sure we're all on the same page here. "For when the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, and the Lord said to Moses, 'I am the Lord. Speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I will tell you.' Moses appealed to the Lord, saying, 'See, I am of impeded speech. How then should Pharaoh heed me?'" So this is the third time now we've seen a reference to Moses's impeded speech. And I'll tell you just a few different interpretations of that. One is simply that Moses, by his nature, he has a speech impediment. He has a stutter. He's just one of those people who has that problem. It is interesting then to see he goes from being someone with a speech impediment to being someone known for his oratory, known for giving these super long speeches. The entire book of Deuteronomy is supposed to be Moses's farewell speech. Well, it's a massive speech, and so what's going on there? It's perhaps along the same lines of the Islamic claim that the Prophet Muhammad was illiterate, and somehow he was able to write down the entire Quran in sort of the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. That this comes to prove the divinity of what's going on here, because there's certainly no human explanation. That's possible. It's possible that's what's going on here, that Moses's ability to speak comes from God. That is what is implied in the previous Parsha when God rebukes Moses for this argument, saying essentially, I, God, am the one who gives people the power of speech. There's another interpretation that I just want to throw at you, and you can take it for what it's worth. But a cure for stuttering is an effect of taking psilocybin, the psychedelic component in magic mushrooms. And there are many people who have looked at the Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, and pointed out its similarity to taking psychedelic drugs. Could be, it's possible. There's plenty of literature on the connection between drug use and religious experience. One of my old friends, a rabbi in California named Zach Kamenetz, has actually done a lot of very interesting work on this subject. And it's not a subject with which I'm intimately familiar, so I'm just gonna have to take other people's word for that. There's another explanation about Moses's impeded speech, that he hasn't lived in this world for a very long time. You know, Moses is 80 years old when the Exodus is happening. He's going to live to be 120, so his life can sort of be broken into 3 40-year chunks. He has 40 years as a prince of Egypt, 40 years as a Midianite shepherd with his father-in-law and his wife, and 40 years as the leader of Israel. And so he could be complaining here, well, I've been a shepherd for the past 40 years. I haven't been speaking the language of court. I haven't been speaking in a way that Pharaoh is going to appreciate. Maybe he hasn't spoken any Egyptian in 40 years. And so he's not a very good representative to go to the court of Pharaoh because his Egyptian is so rusty at this point. And there is one more explanation I want to offer, where there is it's a very strange midrash where baby Moses has sort of the power of prophecy, and in the court of Pharaoh, he takes Pharaoh's crown off of his head and puts it on his own, as though to say that that baby Moses knows that he will someday overthrow Pharaoh in a sense. And Pharaoh is quite upset by this and wants to know, does this baby have the power to predict the future or some sort of divine insight? Or is the baby just acting like a baby? I mean, babies do things. You know, my girl would pull on my beard constantly. I don't think she would rip the keep off my head. She still does from time to time. And so Jethro, who will become Moses's father-in-law, at this point, he is a courtier of Pharaoh in Egypt, and he sets up a test for baby Moses. And the angels guide Moses in the correct way to obey the test in a way that will convince Pharaoh that this baby's not a threat, which is, instead of grabbing the scepter, Moses grabs a lump of coal, which the baby Moses then puts in his mouth. And so that is what causes Moses's speech impediment. And it is to save his life.
There's some significance in the coal story because, quite frankly, they didn't use coal back then. Okay, I don't know of any mines coal mines in Egypt, right? So I find that interesting. I think maybe in Afghanistan you might find some coal mines, but I don't think there's so the fact that
I think the text means charcoal where it says
charcoal. Okay. So I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about actually coal.
No. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but no, there wouldn't have been any coal mines in Africa. But no, the charcoal production was a big part of capturing copper and later iron. You had to get the fire very hot in order to melt those out of the rock that they had available. So
I truly find this fascinating because if it was the process, maybe it was a byproduct of smelting copper. I mean, of copper production, or even lead production. I mean, it could have been he was poisoned. I mean, I don't know if that's a concept that that you wouldn't necessarily agree with, but I just find that to be absolutely fascinating, this story that you're just telling, because I remember hearing it once before, a long time ago. And
it's quite the strange story, yeah. And then it's usually told in the context of Jethro, like, what happened? You were the courtier of Pharaoh, and now you're this shepherd. That's strange. I mean, that's very odd. I did last calendar year, last Jewish year, when we did Parashat Yitro, I did a lunch and learn. I can't remember the name of the organization, but it's here in Detroit. They invited me to do a lunch and learn on Zoom, and I spoke about Yitro, the prophet, Jethro, and his the stories of his status. Is he Jewish? Is he a righteous Gentile? Or what's his deal? That was a lot of fun. Okay. All right, we just have a couple of minutes left.
I do have one.
Oh, please, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is regarding Joseph. Okay. So the slavery in Egypt, from what we know, is started because the pharaohs, the great pharaohs of Egypt, forgot the importance of Joseph to the kingdom, and over the years that Joseph was forgotten, and the Israelites were just a threat. So does that concept of Joseph ever get reintroduced by Moses in any of the conversations? Because obviously it's important to Moses and to the Jewish people, because they removed Joseph and took him to the promised land. So Pharaoh had to be cognizant of that, that Joseph story. But yet we're taught that they forgot Joseph and the importance of Joseph. So I that's something that's always been a question that I've had.
It's interesting, right? I mean, it could be that they literally forgot, which may be connected. I think I talked about this at Minyan a few days ago. That Ibn Ezra says that when the text says a new pharaoh, a new king arose in Egypt, Vayakom is the verb that's used. And Ibn Ezra says that means there was a dynastic overthrow, that this is not just a new pharaoh, like the old one died and his son took his place, but this is a brand new dynasty. There was a civil war, and the old pharaoh, the old dynasty, lost. And so they just might not have known about Joseph. They might not have known the story. But I think you can also read it as they acted as though they didn't know. They acted as though it didn't matter. They forgot about him, not in a literal sense, but in a sense of they became ungrateful or something like that.
Okay. That's interesting.
I need to smear before you left.
Yeah. So, yeah, it is interesting though. I mean, like, it never comes up, right? It never comes up in the conversations that we see. Moses never says, none of you would even be here if it hadn't been for our Israelite ancestor, Joseph. Joseph saved this whole country, and now look how ungrateful you are. You're keeping his descendants as slaves. That, like, from a moral perspective, that might have been an interesting argument. It never comes up. It never gets made. And it's interesting. Is that because it should have come up and it didn't? Maybe that wouldn't have been a very effective argument. It seems like God is not especially interested in sort of relitigating the past here. God is very interested in what's going to happen in the future. God is saying, go tell Pharaoh that the Lord is going to take the people out of Egypt, and you're going to see the might of the Lord. You're going to see the outstretched hand and that sort of thing.
Right.
So,
all right. Oh, please, Joanna, go ahead.
One thing, I went to Egypt and visited the pyramids and Karnak. And one thing that's very clear in Egyptian history, when the old regime is out, they literally erase their names from any of the public monuments.
Right.
So the idea of rewriting history and kind of really wiping out memory was a very common thing, I guess, in Egypt.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
So it was
absolutely.
possible to forget Joseph. And after one generation of landowners, it used to be that there were single farmers, and then Joseph instituted the system of all the land being acquired by the government. After a generation or two, people kind of forgot how that all happened, or maybe even worse, resented him.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, people do forget things over time. Memory does fade, and, the past ends up in the past. And yeah, you see this in Egypt. When I lived in Chicago, one of my favorite places to go was the Oriental Institute Museum. For a Bible nerd, it was just a blast. And one of the things you can see there is they have the frescoes made by the Assyrian king Sennacherib, or Sancherib as we call him in Hebrew, commemorating his destruction of the city of Lachish in Judah. And it's really amazing. It's really quite intense. The destruction of Lachish, it doesn't get much play in the Bible because Lachish was the commercial center of Judah, and all the prophets really cared about was Jerusalem. But this was a major blow in the time of the prophet Isaiah, and you can see Sennacherib's commemoration of it. But so many of the faces have been destroyed. So many, like his statue, his portion of it was smashed with some sort of implement, and the scholars think that was done when his palace was taken by the Babylonians, and so that was more than 100 years later. They just went through and they just destroyed everything. They defaced, and they seem not interested actually in sort of systematic destruction, but they just went through and smashed every single face that they could reach.
Wow. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna have to wrap it up. Thank you all for coming, and
It's been great.
Gonna get this up online probably tomorrow. So if you know anyone who would have enjoyed this conversation, you can send them to the YouTube page.